city and the cities across the country in which we live, the promise and the problems, and the potential of the very local places where we pursue our work as activists in the interfaith sphere. For those of us who are here tonight, I would say the city is the workshop of our world. In this fast, globalizing world, that's actually true all over the world. The city with its neighborhoods and its surrounding towns, its suburbs, this is one of the important sites of religious encounter today. Of religious diversity and potentially of that kind of engagement that I refer to as religious pluralism. The city, as Lewis Mumford wrote in his now classic 1961 book, The City and History, is energy converted into culture. When he wrote that book, he looks back at the history of the city and also looks ahead to what he calls its future and prospects. 1961 was almost a couple of revolutions ago in terms of our modern thinking about globalization and cities and urban life, etc. But Mumford also saw on the horizon of his time that the resources, the culture, the industry, the commerce, all of the things that are part of the life of the city are concentrated, have been concentrated in cities themselves, and in our age are becoming diffused all over the world, articulated first into large metropolitan areas and beyond that into worldwide systems. He wrote, "This book opens with a city that was symbolically a world and closes with a world that has become, in many practical respects, a city." And we recognize that. There were these great cities, like the one I first studied in India, the city of Benares, or Beijing, or Rome, that were symbolically world cities, the cosmopolis. And now we find that cities are articulated into metropolitan systems. And today, London's National Portrait Gallery and Boston's Public Library and Boston's Dunkin' Donuts and Seattle's Best Coffee and New York's Stock Exchange and Citibank are all part of that system. They're no longer local, but are translocal, or global. Now, since Mumford wrote in 1961, something else has happened that he didn't quite see, but he almost saw on the horizon. And that was the very way in which the composition of our cities has changed, in some cases quite radically, with the migration of peoples. At the close of this study, he does kind of see that, but he would be so interested in looking at cities today, including ours. A multitude of cities like Boston and Detroit and Cleveland and Dallas are increasingly these world cities, symbolically the world. They gather within them a population like ours in Boston that includes people from all over the world. And I think his purpose in writing about the city is as relevant today as it was in 1961. He realizes that it would be necessary, as he put it, to lay a new foundation for urban life in a world that requires a new kind of world city to survive. He writes, "The mixture of divinity and power and personality that brought the ancient city into existence must be weighed out anew in terms of the ideology and culture of our own time, and poured into fresh civic, regional, and planetary molds." And this challenge is really, in my view, the interfaith challenge. What is it that will become the new foundation for urban life in the very complex urban environments that we have today? What is the role of faith in shaping fresh, civic, regional, and planetary molds of our lives of connection with one another? Now, there's a lot of attention to cities these days. Urban study programs in the School of Design and the School of Government and Policy Studies. The economist Jeffrey Sachs, in his book Commonwealth, speaks of the 21st century as the urban century, our century. For the first time in human history, he writes, most of the world's population will live in urban centers rather than in villages. And this is a shift that's happened just in the last few years. 2008 was the moment he was writing, where this weight of population from largely rural areas to urban areas has changed across the globe. It will never go back. The city, then, is where the challenges of the future are encountered. And we can see them in cities large and small. The city faces the challenge of transportation, of industry, of communications and housing, of job creation. And in this process of urbanization, many other things are urbanized, as he puts it. Hunger is urbanized, disease is urbanized, unanticipated health challenges of many sorts. But nowhere among the many things that Jeffrey Sachs speaks of as being urbanized in the urban century are the people. The ethnic and religious communities, their density, their proximity, and the challenge that this increasing urbanization poses in terms of human communities that have previously lived more or less far apart, and now we're living next door to one another. This is our challenge, certainly, in the city of America in the 21st century. And I have to say that the more I read into urban theory, the less I see of anything that has to do with religion as they're thinking about the challenges that the great metropolitan areas face today. This is a very important issue because we know that our cities and towns are places where our deepest differences, our deepest commitments are also urbanized. And it's in the cities and towns in which we live that we undertake, I think, what is one of the most critical tasks of our whole time, to come to know one another as people of faith across lines of faith differences, as people of religious faith and of secular commitments. And that whole issue of faith, ideology, and the engagement with one another in our time, these are really our great issues. And we as communities of faith, as communities of people, whether you're in a faith tradition or not, who are committed to this kind of interfaith relation, these are among the communities that will, I believe, lay the real foundation for a new kind of urban life. We need you. All of us need one another in the kind of world that we enter into today. And so I feel that we have to take the city as the site of interreligious encounter, our primary workshop when we think about pluralism, the many ways in which we come together, but recognizing that cities today have also created ghettos, areas where people live in separation from one another, places where this complex mosaic, as some people would speak of it, where the pieces of this touch, but they don't really mix or relate. And then there are the new kinds of spaces that are created by groups like this and the many communities from which you come that are deliberately, creatively, carefully put together across the lines of difference that have so divided our time. And I really do believe that our religious future will be worked out here, in the city, or in the small city, even in the town that has become more complex. Not so much in the big interfaith parliaments and that sort of thing that are global. Those are interesting and they're important in their own way. But those kind of global icons of the swamis and the archbishops and the Buddhist monks and all the people in their various garments who pose together, they are an important kind of icon. But most of the work that needs to be done locally. And our task is to figure out how to do this. I titled one of my books From Bozeman to Benares, but at the moment, let me just talk about Bozeman to Benares to Boston, really, because I did grow up in a small town in Montana, the town of Bozeman. I was not really exposed to urban life until I was a college student. And the first city I ever really lived in was the city of Benares in India, where I went on my junior year abroad. It was there that I really found something of my own life's vocation. I might, if I'd stuck around, I might have become a Methodist minister, you never know. But I found a different sense of calling there to study and try to understand the religious worlds of Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs and Buddhists and people I had never really known before in my life. And that led me into doctoral studies, into the study of India, into working ever more on that sacred city of Benares. That was actually my first book, to spend time in that city and try to understand what that great place had meant to Hindus. It was actually in Benares as well that I first heard the call to prayer, because there are a lot of Muslims who live in Benares. It was in India that I first went to a synagogue, that I never had seen a synagogue. It happened to be in Cochin during our holidays, during the Christmas time, and I was with some Jewish students, and they said, "We'll go to Rome." You know, that sounded good. We went to the synagogue. And so it was that that year in India really changed the direction of my own life to thinking about the comparative study of religion and the religious traditions of friends and neighbors from all around the world. I might say also, just to recapitulate something that most of you know, that it was during that same year, the year was 1965, that I spent my junior year there. But it was that same year that the Immigration and Nationalities Act was passed in the U.S. That put our immigration on new footing, that, as Robert Kennedy put it, meant that we were not looking for racial and all kinds of equality in every aspect of our national life, and still leaving discrimination as the basis of our immigration law, which it was. So that changed, and we began to change. We, the people of the United States of America, began to change in really